For those, probably, I'm assuming everybody on this call already knows MRB Group and all of the great engineering and architecture design work that we're engaged in here in Texas and beyond. MRB has been around for about 100 years, and we got about 150 clients, and nearly all of them are local government clients. Where we love working with communities on community development challenges, economic development challenges, civil engineering, architecture, you name it. If it's going on in your community, we try to have a subject matter expert on hand who can help you through that. As part of that, we have a little unit that I head up for the organization called SmarterLocalGov, and SmarterLocalGov is made up of a whole team of practitioners. I do joke that we have a couple of token consultants on the SmarterLocalGov team, but in large part, everybody on our team has worked for local government in some form or fashion. I'm a former city manager. You all probably know Janet. She's a former city secretary. We got former mayors, finance directors, HR folks. So, as you're working with us on the design side, with our engineering or architecture teams, if you do stumble across a problem that engineers can't solve, and I know there's so few of those problems out there that can't be solved by a good engineer, but if you happen to stumble across a management challenge, economic community development challenge, just know that MRB Group's got folks on our team who can help you think through that too, and that's kind of how we got to the topic for today. A couple of members of our team, some of these folks may be familiar to you. But on the ARPA side, the folks on this slide are the people who are working to make sure that we're subject matter experts on your behalf. You likely know Janet. She's our Southwest Government Services Manager. She works with a ton of MRB Group clients, kind of helping you figure out how best to finance your infrastructure challenges. She's a former city manager, former city secretary. She's an amazing grant writer and grant administrator, working with communities all across Texas on getting projects funded. And she's been incredibly successful, and we're proud to have her on our team. Jordan Everhart is our senior planning associate here in Texas. Jordan works in our land use and transportation planning. He's been supporting Janet on grants this year, and is helping us support communities in strategic planning. And so he's kind of our boots on the ground planning expertise here in Texas. I head up the SmarterLocalGov group. I've got a couple of decades, about 20 years here in public service as a city manager, assistant city manager, and community development department head. And I try to knit together this SmarterLocalGov team to really look at community challenges from a 360-degree point of view, looking at communities holistically to identify how best to address kind of deep-rooted challenges. We got about a 10-person team, and like I say, virtually every corner of City Hall is represented. If it's happening in City Hall, Town Hall, or County Administration, we've got somebody on our team who's worked on it from that angle. And then finally on this slide is Diana Smith, who's a senior advisor to our local government team. She's a former mayor, former state legislative staffer, and she's another amazing person who's kind of been all around the local government side of things, and is a strong advisor and strong ally with our clients and with our team. So we got a really spectacular team here who's ready to support you on this and really any other local government management challenge. So you probably already know what's on this slide, but I call the ARPA a monumental, I've been calling it a once in a generation opportunity. Federal grants are out there. There's a million of them. State grants, they come around every year. This is completely different in that for the first time since I've been doing this, and really most of the people on our team that I've talked to have said they can't remember a time like this, where the federal government took a big pot of money, broke it up amongst every local government in the country, virtually every local government in the country, and provided direct support with really limited strings attached. And we can talk about what those are shortly. The funding is basically broken up by population. And so if you're wondering how they landed on the number that you've been advised about, in large part, it has to do with should have said at the beginning, we are going to jump to a Q&A at the end, but if you're until we get to that Q&A, it'd be great if folks could mute. Just I know it's still office time, so there's certainly lots of work still going on. So if you don't mind muting your mics, that'd be great. Like I say, it's generally allocated by population, and it's going to be deposited in 2 funding cycles. So this year, you should expect to get about half the funds that you were allocated, and next year, you'll get the other half. Now, the one trick here is that you had to step up. In Texas, it was a couple weeks ago, you had to step up and say to TDEM, we're in or we're out. I imagine nobody on this call said we're out or you wouldn't be here, but hopefully everybody on this call has made that filing with TDEM so that you're in the queue. Because generally what the federal government said is for smaller communities, for what they call non-entitlement units, the money's going to pass through the state. The state can't do what it typically does, which is take a skim or an administrative fee or tack on a bunch of other regulations that the federal government didn't tack on. They can't do any of that. But what they can do is create a process to get you in the queue. Texas has done that. It's been done through TDEM, and so hopefully everybody on this call filed that. If you didn't, it'd be good, and you're on this call, it'd be good for you to reach out to Janet just so you guys can talk through whether or not there are any workarounds there. In terms of allowable uses, I call it easy money to spend, and I got to start calling it relatively easy money to spend. For federal government money, it's relatively easy money to spend. It basically breaks out into 2 buckets. The first bucket are COVID-related expenses or COVID-related financial impacts. As a local government, if you started from the beginning, or if you had some mechanism, or you just rolled up your sleeves and did the hard work of isolating your actual COVID-related expenses, things like overtime associated with COVID-related impacts, things like personal protective equipment, PPE, masks. If you had to fit out your offices with in the olden days, they used to call them sneeze guards, but any of the plastics, any of the dividers to keep your staff safe, sanitizers, that kind of stuff. If you tracked all those costs and you can demonstrate that those costs were directly related to COVID, then the federal government will let you go ahead and just recoup all of those costs. And then that money goes back into your general fund, and you can use it basically as you see fit. On the revenue side, if you experienced a revenue impact, then you're able to claim that as well. And again, I call it scraping it off. You're able to scrape off that piece of your allocation that can be attributed to revenue loss. And there is a formula, and it's not incredibly complex, but there are nuances. So the general formula is you take your 2019 revenue, and the federal government will presume that your revenues were going to grow by 4.1%. If your revenues did not grow by 4.1%, then you get to take the difference between your 19 revenue plus 4.1% and what your actual 20 revenue was. And again, it's a little bit complex when we have to verbalize an algebraic equation. But if you give Janet a call or shoot me an email, and I'm happy to walk you through it. The trick is it has to be an organic slump, for lack of a better word. It can't be, in 2019, you got some big grants and those went away in 2020, so your bottom line revenue dropped. You can't have rolled back your property tax rate from 19 to 20, things like that. There's a lot of little slippery things that work their way in there. But if you think you might have had a pretty serious COVID-related impact, reach out to us and we're happy to take a look at it and see if you'd qualify. To the degree that you do, to the degree that you did have a COVID-related revenue impact, then again, you can scrape that money off, drop it into your general fund, and call it a day. We'll talk a little bit about the reporting that's required, but that really frees you up to do whatever you like with that money. Other COVID-related expenses that the federal government will allow you to spend this money on are economic development-related expenses. So what the law says is that you can offset COVID-related financial impacts of your residents. And Janet and I were just joking that there are communities certainly that are looking at direct payments to residents. That's an option. There are communities that are looking at direct payments to businesses, whether they're loans or grants, where a business can demonstrate a COVID-related financial impact. Anything that's associated, Janet was referencing a community here regionally that is doing a pay to vaccinate program. So encouraging parents to have their eligible children vaccinated, and they're actually giving them a direct payment, $250 to come in per kid to come and back. I wish I had waited on my kids. $250 per kid to get vaccinated. That's an allowable expense. So what I'll tell you though, on the COVID-related expense side, there is going to be some paperwork to do. You're going to have to be able to demonstrate that this is really a COVID-related expense, and it gets to be pretty narrow. And in those instances where you make an allocation to a small business, for example, you're going to then be responsible to ensure that that small business was a qualified receiver of those funds. So I will say that of the two buckets, the COVID-related expenses bucket is the one that's a little bit more rigid in terms of tracking the expenses, tracking the revenue losses, tracking subrecipients, those kinds of things. Now, this other bucket, the infrastructure bucket, is very straightforward. If you've got a water project, sewer project, stormwater project, or a broadband project, you don't have to demonstrate any COVID-related effect. So you can take your entire allocation and apply it to an eligible water project, sewer project, stormwater project, broadband project. If you are served by another agency that's not a municipal agency, a water supply corporation or someone like that, and that organization, water sewer authority, any of those folks who are providing service in your community, to the degree that their project will benefit your community, you can allocate your COVID funds to those projects. On the water, sewer, stormwater side, if the project is state revolving fund eligible, so drinking water, clean water, it just has to be eligible for award under the state revolving fund, then it's eligible under this project. It doesn't actually have to have been awarded funds. It doesn't have to be on an IUP. It doesn't have to be it doesn't have to meet any of those other tests. It just has to be eligible. So Janet or any of our engineering folks would be able to tell you, the list of projects. The feds they didn't want to create a whole nother list of eligible projects. So they just identified this standard federal program, these state revolving funds, and said, if it's fundable there, it's fundable here. And so just about anything you can think of, plant improvements, pipe improvements, water meters as an example, engineering, anything associated with planning, and anything associated with that stuff would be an eligible expense under this project. So how do you do it? How do you get the money? Well, like I said, you just cleared the first hurdle, which is fantastic. You submitted to TDEM that you want the money. Now's the time to take a breath, because you have a little time. You got a couple of years before this money has to be out the door. And so you don't want to rush into this thinking, I got to hurry up before this money evaporates. Once you're in the queue, that money is yours until the program exhausts, and that's years out. We'll talk about that. So what I would do if I were you right now is just stop and take a breath and do a needs assessment. And we like to tell folks, do a needs assessment as if ARPA didn't exist, as if it's just sitting out there. What are our infrastructure needs today? And so once you look at that and you look at of our infrastructure needs, what are water, sewer, stormwater projects, broadband projects that could be funded with this money? That's how you move into project selection. So this really does give you an opportunity to take a look at your total infrastructure needs and identify your priorities. Once you've got a full list of your priorities, our recommendation is then that you look at ARPA funding guidance, and you think about what's eligible there. You think about projects that are ready, because even though we don't have to spend it right away, there is an end date. So for example, you wouldn't want to, if you got $1 million in ARPA funding coming, but you had a $4 million project, you wouldn't want to pledge the $1 million of ARPA funding and then take 3 or 4 years to try to put the other money together. You should have a ready project plan, good to go for these funds. And we'll talk about why in a moment. The funding should be able to be fully committed within the time frame. And so when you're determining project selection, it comes down to priority and readiness. Is your project effectively shovel ready? Procurement. So a couple of spaces in this slideshow, and if you see any guidance on the street about ARPA, this phrase non-entitlement units shows up pretty frequently. And what that refers to is, again, the federal government did not want to create a whole other way of administering this. So what they did was use the HUD's Community Development Block Grant assessment program. And in the Community Development Block Grant program, you have entitlement units, and those are much larger units of government. But if you're a city under 50,000 people, then you're considered a non-entitlement unit by HUD. That's probably most of you on this call. Non-entitlement units for this program, you just need to use your standard procurement. Whatever your procurement policy says, there's no additional language that you need to put in an RFP or an RFQ. There's no additional language that you need to put in a bid document. No Davis-Bacon, minority and women business enterprises. Traditional federal set-asides don't apply. Janet made me put in a codicil here, and that one or a caveat. That one caveat is unless you're pairing this money with other federal money. So if you've got $1 million of ARPA funds and $2 million of USDA funds, you're going to have to be compliant for the whole bucket, for the whole 3 million. You're going to have to be compliant with USDA's regulations. They will have procurement regulations. They will have Davis-Bacon and MWBE guidance. And so basically, you're going to have to hold yourself to the highest standard of whatever funding source you're using. But if you're just taking your $1 million or your 100,000 or whatever number you got from ARPA and spending it on a standalone project that's just with ARPA and local dollars, then you do not have to worry about Davis-Bacon, prevailing wage, MWB, or any of those other federal programs. I'd still, if I were you, document the procurement process just in case anybody ever comes back and asks, how this worked. This isn't free money, right? There's no such thing. So, so just like you would with anything else, make sure you're documenting your process. You got the bids or the quotes or whatever your policy requires. On the project management side, you're going to manage this project like you would just about any other capital project or any other project, any other engineering or architecture project. Make sure that you're using your standard project management guidance. Your expense tracking, your tracking payment applications. There are no added restrictions. Like I said, the state can't add any of their own. So you're going to get this money just deposited into an account. And when it lands in that account, anything you're spending it on, just make sure it's tracked separately, just so you don't want the federal government wandering into your normal accounting books. So here's the trick. I keep saying you don't have to spend it right away. Take a breath, take a breath. Funds have to be obligated by December 31st, 2024. And what does obligated mean? Effectively, it means you have to be under contract to expend these funds by December 31st, 2024. So you're doing a capital project, you need to be signed and committed, and whatever your purchasing policy does, if it issues a purchase order or whatever you do to get a project rolling, that has to happen by December 31, 2024. Every nickel of this money has to be out of your account by December 31st, 2026. So you can see we do have a little time. We're about 3 years away from the time you have to have it fully committed. But the engineers on the call will remind you that these projects don't spring out of the ground overnight. You'll need time. So, after we take a breath here and do our assessment, let's go ahead and get these projects moving just so we can have all of these funds committed on this schedule and then expended. In terms of record keeping, the government provides very little guidance on this. There's not, again, they kind of leave it to you. My standard practice when I was a city manager or a finance director and we won a grant was I kept it all in a different file cabinet, in a completely different file setup, so that if an auditor shows up to monitor my program or to review my grant, they go to that file cabinet and we pull it, and every piece of record keeping is tied to that project. And I don't want to scare anybody. This is an easy peasy program. You got nothing to worry about if you follow your normal process. But it's just important that you keep good records on this stuff, because the last organization you want to be in Dutch with is the Department of Treasury. So questions have come up, and there's some guidance from National League of Cities and others about a single audit. If you're a regular spender of federal funds, you'll know what that term means. Federal regulations say that if you expend more than $750,000 of federal funds in a given year, then you're required to have a separate standalone audit of those expenses, and that's called a single audit. ARPA doesn't bring with it some new burden or some additional burden relative to the single audit. If you were headed that way anyway, ARPA counts toward it. So the example I've been giving is, if you received a $1 million USDA grant and you were spending that this year, and then you were going to throw another $200,000 of ARPA funds into that project, the feds are going to audit all of those federal expenditures. They're going to audit all your USDA expenses and your ARPA expenses and any other federal programs that you've used. It's a cumulative requirement. So if you get in your ARPA allocation, your ARPA allocation, if that is less than 750, and really if it's less than 750 per year, and you're getting no additional federal funds, chances are you're not going to have that single audit requirement. But I did want to throw it out there because it's come up a couple of times. Reporting, great news for any use for these non-entitlement units. This is the lightest reporting I've seen from any grant. You get a grant from Walmart, you got to do more reporting than this thing. Effectively, non-entitlement units are required to file one report per year until you finish expending the funds. So Janet and I were just talking about this one and done concept. We've been coaching our clients to find a project that you can expend all of your ARPA funds on, that's relatively ready, so that your first report is your last report. It probably won't be your last report because your first report's due October 31st of this year. But your next report, your 2022 report, could be your last report if you were able to expend all of those funds and close out your project. But again, it's no big deal. It's literally a couple of forms that say, here's what I spent the money on, here's why it's compliant with the act, and that's that. It is a very, very light reporting requirement. If you use it on infrastructure, if you use it on these COVID-related expenses, you're going to have some more demonstration to do about compliance. If you grant it out or loan it out to private sector entities, you're going to have to chase them a little bit for compliance. but generally, if it's just you and you've got one infrastructure project, it can be a pretty light lift. You'll close it out. That'll be done. That'll be it. You know, there's lots of gloom and doom out there about, oh, the feds can come back and audit. They can, and they always can. They can anytime you accept federal dollars. So don't get hung up at all on reporting. Don't get hung up at all on compliance. It's very simple and very straightforward. And of course, we're always here to help. So if you run into the rocks at all, just give us a shout. So from an ARPA perspective, you know, our takeaways are, hey, this is once in your career, most likely, that you're going to have an opportunity like this. So be smart about it, be patient with it while you're identifying projects, because it's not going to come back again, most likely. You know, the uses come in those two buckets. So just try to keep it to those two. Try to keep it as bright line as you can within those two. Federal funding is not a place to take a bunch of risks, to be honest with you. So try to stay as clear as you can. Compliance is a light lift. There's not any additional federal regulation. There's no new requirements associated with the funds. So just follow your standard reporting and compliance and record keeping guidelines, and you'll be fine. And make sure that you've got all of those funds committed or incurred by the close of 2024, by December 31st of 2024, and that money is all out the door, out of your accounts at the close of 2026. While we got you here, we also wanted to talk to you about another effort that's going on statewide. So Anthony Beach is on with MRB Group to talk about TWDB and the Region 8 flood program. Anthony.
Thank you, Matt. Certainly appreciate it. Yeah, I wanted to talk to you guys about a program that is not specifically part of ARPA. It's actually additional funding on top of ARPA. And this is in regards to a new program, that flood planning program that we're doing here in Texas. In 2019, the Texas legislature and Governor Abbott, back when they used to work, greatly expanded the Texas Water Development Board's role in flood planning. The board will now be administering a new state and regional flood planning process with flood planning regions based on river basins. I personally am on Region 8 and specifically representing municipalities. So any of you guys out there in the communities, if you're certainly in Region 8, which includes almost all of Central Texas, please contact us or myself and let us know about any flood planning issues that you're having in your community. The Texas Water Development Board has designated 15 regional flood planning areas throughout the state. Again, most of us are going to be in Region 8. If you're not sure what region you're in, if you can contact myself or Janet, we can certainly look that up. Another thing I wanted to talk about is, maybe you're asking, how can I help my community in regards to flood planning? We have shared some stakeholder links. That's that link that's on the bottom of this slide. And what that, for both communities, and if you go to that website, you'll see an option to enter either a community or an individual survey. So use those survey links to select locations and also describe your flooding issue at that location. The first initial round of construction funding dollars will be used to address these identified issues at each of the locations that you've identified. One last thing I wanted to mention is a schedule. The problem is we're short-lived here, so the surveys are actually due August the 13th in 2 days. We are meeting next week, the board is, and that date may be extended, but I would not count on it. The first regional flood plans will be due in January of 2023, and the first state flood plan will be due and published in September of 2024. So it's going to be that timeline, the September 2024, when is it adopted by the legislature, is when the money will then flow towards the projects. And I'll be available to answer any questions later on in the session if they may come up. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Horn.
Thank you, Mr. Beach. So, we teed this up as a round table, and we endeavor to dedicate as much of the time as we can as possible to your ideas, your experiences, your questions. We know it's a new program. It's there's interim rules and updated regulations. Everything's dated as of such and such, and so we understand concerns that you might have relative to the unknown. But relative to kind of what's on your mind today, we're happy to answer any questions as we understand the federal guidance, or really to hear your ideas. If you've already started thinking about ARPA and how your community is going to invest it, we'd love to hear what you're thinking, just so your peers here on the call might get some inspiration from that. So please do jump in here and ask any questions or offer up any insights that you might have. Anybody have anything they'd love to share? While you're thinking, and jump in and cut me off anytime, because for those of you who know me on this call, I could just keep this up all day. So feel free to cut me off. I will not be offended. Now I'm in filler mode. So one thing that's come up, and our good friend Tom Brown down in the Austin office kind of opened our eyes to this, but an area, so we mentioned water, wastewater, stormwater, broadband, and we clumped that into infrastructure because in the law, they spell out those infrastructure areas as eligible expenses. One area of infrastructure that the law actually considers COVID-related impact is improvements to parks. Outdoor spaces saw a higher level of use during COVID. It was kind of widely distributed or widely understood that a way to mitigate the spread of COVID was to have people outside in the open air in the sunshine. And so what the feds have said is, if you want to improve your parks, adding equipment, adding amenities in your parks, we were just talking about trails, other things that would expand people's ability to be outside, then that is an eligible expense. And anything associated with getting ready to do those projects, right? And similarly on the water and wastewater side, stormwater, broadband, engineering, planning, any kind of pre-development work that you're thinking about as part of this effort is all, at least as the National League of Cities and others understand it, they'd be eligible expenses. So think through that too as you're doing your assessment or your needs assessment. Are there parks or playgrounds or trails in your community that could use a touch up?
Filled with water. Yes, a lot of them are filled up.
Anybody else have thoughts or insights, questions? It's a quiet group. This is what happens when you do it at 4 o'clock.
Like I said, the only.
I'd also draw attention to, I've been thinking about some of the more unique uses that I've seen Um,
this one, did you get to that one or no?
somebody out there.
Yes, I didn't get a chance to write it down or write anything.
There we go. Sorry, Reese. I think you should be able to unmute yourself if you need to. The economic development side, economic impacts of COVID. One community that we're working with, actually, it's a county. The county has identified infrastructure and economic development efforts as related to COVID as a priority. So some of the county, or what the county has done is kind of put a call out to all the municipalities within the county and said, send us your ideas, your projects, what you're thinking. One local development corporation that we're working with, who's a multi-jurisdictional LDC or EDC, is considering establishing a small business grant program whereby they evaluate projects based on based on the impacts from COVID to the business itself, and based upon so in other words, I kind of call that like the saddest story or the hardest story out there. But then on kind of innovations in ensuring that there's not spread during future phases of this pandemic or future pandemics. And so what are you doing to improve outdoor dining? What are you doing to minimize interaction amongst patrons inside of your business? Restaurants especially are looking at a lot of different innovative approaches to addressing potential spread. And so what these communities have looked at, what these two communities who share an EDC have looked at is, hey, let's open this up competitively. Let's hear the most unique or the coolest ideas and determine funding allocation from there, which we thought was really interesting in terms of an opportunity to do something really creative, things that we might not be able to dream up on our own. Has anybody on the call already put together a plan for spending your COVID dollars? Anybody out there already have those dollars earmarked for a project? I'd love to hear what projects are already accounting for these funds. I do see some folks on from CTCOG. I would love to hear about your interactions with your member jurisdictions and whether you're hearing anything, seeing anything that would be of interest to this group.
Hello, this is Anna. I think at this point we're kind of in the pre-planning phase. We're going to be helping a couple counties and then a couple cities. But yeah, I think sewer is a big, sewer infrastructure is a big thing for so many places right now, because everybody seemed to build it at the same time and everybody's sewer infrastructure is starting to fall apart. Yeah. So it's much needed funds for that. But we do see some places in our region doing small business grant programs again. We also they might be doing a broadband study using some of their funds as like a regional approach. That's still getting looked into, but yeah, people are definitely doing multi-prong approaches depending on what's impacted the most, but they're still in the pre-planning phases right now.
That's great. I appreciate the insight. Janet, do you have additional insights or ideas that we might not have touched on today?
No, I think you pretty much touched on most all of the projects we had discussed. You know, it kind of leaves it wide open what the money can be used on. It is a great opportunity for a lot of small cities. It's some cities weren't expecting anything, you know, and a lot didn't even know that they were going to get it. And then, you know, it's kind of an early Christmas present, I guess you could consider it. It helps, even though, you know, it has to be spent on water, wastewater, drainage, parks, anything like that. The cities, I know it can be overwhelming because they do have so many needs, and it's hard to decide what should we tackle first with this money. So being a former city manager, I know I would have loved to have had this dropped into my lap at the time. So I know Kara's on. Kara, have you planned anything in particular with your funds?
Well, while Kara's getting to her mute button, I did see a question just come in. It came in from Jordan about emergency preparedness or planning for the next pandemic. Jana, have you seen anything in the guidance that would suggest that's eligible? Any emergency preparedness planning, that kind of thing?
I have not. I didn't. Let me check on some of the questions that have been asked.
There's some really way out. It's called way out and wild, projects or opportunities here. A public jobs program. I've talked to at least one agency who is who's experiencing high levels of unemployment in their community, and they're going to take their ARPA dollars and hire crews to do projects over the summer in the name of a public jobs program, which is an interesting idea. The other one is in a lot of places the courts shut down, and what's happening now is that as they reopen, there's this ridiculous backlog of cases. And what these funds allow you to do is hire additional court help to get you over that hump, to get these cases processed. So there are a few places in there that you can use these funds for operational reasons, and particularly when the government has said this specific thing is a yes, like that court program or the public jobs program. That's one where you can jump all over it and just make a go of it. You would have to demonstrate, of course, that you did have a backlog, which shouldn't be too hard to do. I mean, it's definitely just about every courtroom I've been to. Not that I've only been as a consultant, not as a representee, but most of the courthouses I've been through, the wait times now, or the processing times for cases, are just astronomical. Other questions, thoughts, ideas?
Hey, this is you, Ryan. I'm sorry I got to the party late. So if you addressed this already, my apologies. We do have a jurisdiction that is interested to see if you can use these funds to offset the housing of inmates due to COVID, because their costs were increased. Their capacity was lower. They had to house them out of their own jurisdiction. Have you heard of anything like that in your research?
So I don't know about you, Janet, but I haven't seen that directly referenced, but that seems like one of those things where you can, so we were just talking about the parks, and someone had asked a question about, hey, I had to hire additional staff to manage the parks because we had additional visitation because folks couldn't go anywhere else. And the Fed said, yep, you can do that. You can reclaim those expenses. Public safety overtime due to shift shifting, if you will, or alternate staffing solutions. All of those things are eligible. So that seems like one that if you can really point to this as, hey, we never had this problem before. COVID came. Now we have this problem. it cost us this much money. It's directly tracked and attributable. It seems like it's possible. If you shoot Janet an email, where her email address will be on the last slide here when I pop it back up. If you shoot Janet an email, we can do a little more digging and get back to you on the specific question. But like I say, I mean, it seems like a pretty clear impact directly associated with COVID.
Thanks.
Yeah. Other questions, thoughts, big ideas? Well, we're here always. Our favorite thing to do is talk to y'all about what you got on your plate, and to support you in kind of making your communities work. Janet is right here and is available at a moment's notice. So her email address is up here on the screen now. She's super responsive and happy to get back to you. Our website's here. It's got additional contact information for all of our team members in our offices. So if you've got a specific question or just an idea that you want to bounce around, we'd love to talk with you about it. We're pretty excited about this program and the possibilities it has for our communities. Like I say, it's kind of a once in a generation thing. So if there aren't other questions or ideas, happy to stay on and talk, or otherwise we're going to close it up. And we really thank everybody for being on today. Thanks to Karen, who helped us get this presentation up and running, and to Harrison, who hosted it for us. We are going to, we have recorded it. We are going to be getting it back out there for distribution. So if you just want to look back fondly on it and hear it again, it'll be there. Or if you'd like to share it with your friends, colleagues, peers, anyone who you think would benefit, we'd love for you to do that. So with that, we'll call it an afternoon, and we thank you so much for participating. And please do give us a call if there's anything we can do to help.